At that point, my head was telling me, run, Tosin, run. You should not be in this relationship, but my feet felt stuck because I didn't have a personal sense of worth, and I had lost my sense of power and agency, the power to determine the course of my life and actually go in that direction. I'd lost it because I had these wounds in my soul and these needs that this guy was meeting.
Welcome to Shining Light Show, Tosin. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Flourish. It's a joy to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I want to start the conversation by talking about how broken a lot of people in the church are. When we see people, you think everybody walking is normal or is fine, but really people have issues that they are going through. Like, can you just talk a little bit about more, also like based off of what you've experienced, what you've seen, like being a therapist or
soul prosperity coach.
Okay, yeah, being a coach.
An emotional wellness coach, yes. I was saying to you the other time that I don't agree with any brand of faith, and this is not necessarily a body of faith as we know it, but, just personal belief that excludes a believer from pursuing emotional healing and wholeness. Because I found that it's actually quite difficult to walk in the spirit if you're not healed in your soul. Because man is a tripartite being. You are a spirit, you have a soul, you live in a body. And so you can't ignore the state of your soul and think you can function optimally spiritually, right? What we can do as believers is to leverage our spirituality for the healing of our souls and not ignore the state of our souls. And the truth is that there's so many people who are broken, who are wounded, who carry wounds in their souls. There are people who are as old as 50, 60, who are still living out the wounds of their 5-year-old selves, of their 2-year-old selves. We live in a broken world, even though Jesus has come to restore all things. But the truth is that people have experienced stuff. There has been abuse, neglect, rejection. People have faced the divorce of their parents, the loss of loved ones, the loss of, family members. So many things have happened in the lives of people that have the capacity to put a dent on the state of their souls. And most times, because we're not even educated on the need, for emotional healing, we're not even aware that we're walking wounded. There are things, responses that we have to situations that we have normalized. We just think, oh, this is my personality type. This is how I am. I'm just not a people person. I just don't really like people. I just find it a bit difficult to trust people. It's my nature. It's how I am. But it's not how you are. It's not how God created you to be. Something happened that began to shape the way you see other people, that started to shape your worldview, that shaped your self-view, that shaped even your God view. There are people who have views about God that are broken, and they stem from, for instance, father issues. And so they see God through the lens of the relationship that they had with their earthly fathers, So stuff like that, it's really rampant today.
What are some of the signs that someone can see or see in their lives that can point to the fact that, oh, you need healing in this area or something like that? Because, some people don't even know that they need to pay attention to certain things in their soul. But like, how do you know? What are some of the symptoms that, can tell you that, okay, there's a problem?
Okay, that's such a broad question because, pain, it morphs, it changes form as we get older. It changes form. Something might happen to you as a child, and then it completely starts to manifest in a different way as you grow. One of the signs that I know that a lot of people who are going through pain manifest is there's a sense of not being at home in your own life, just feeling like a stranger in your own life, just constantly feeling like something is off in your life, regardless of all the things that seem to be going on well for you outside. You have a job, you have a seemingly great marriage, you have kids, you have money in the bank, you have a house full of nice stuff, but it just seems like nothing is enough. It just feels like you just have this gnawing feeling in your soul. Sometimes it comes as sadness. For some other people, it comes as despair, as hopelessness. For some other people, it shows up as anger. Someone may find, for instance, that they have trouble trusting people. They just have huge Jericho-like walls around their hearts, around their lives. You just find that it's hard for you to be emotionally vulnerable. Even in your marriage, for instance, with friends, you just find that you develop walls. You might find that you're defensive, you might find, for instance, that you struggle with taking risks. Anything that has the possibility of failure, you run from it. For some people, they are constantly chasing after the next big thing. And on the outside, it might look like this is such a noble thing. It might look like, wow, this person has a great drive because they're pursuing the next degree, they're getting the next job, they're always on to the next big thing. But what is actually powering that decision or those decisions is a brokenness in their souls, is a feeling of inadequacy. And so they feel like they always have to do something in order to feel a certain kind of way, Another way it can manifest is through perpetual feelings of shame. There are people that they just feel like they can't open up to others because they're afraid that others will find something in them that will repel them. They might not have necessarily done anything shameful, but it's just a feeling they carry around. And so they can't be open to other people. They just feel like there's something about me. For some other people, they just feel fundamentally flawed. They just feel like I'm defective. I'm broken. There's one memo I didn't get. Every other person seems to have their life figured out. Every other person seems to be okay, but there's just something fundamentally wrong with me, right? It shows up in so many different ways. And I feel like we will see it as we go along in our conversation. Yeah.
And for you personally, is this something that you've experienced? And
Absolutely.
How did your own, will I say, experience as a child now manifest physically, eventually, or as you continue to grow?
Yeah, it's so powerful to see, how God has just carried me on my journey of life. And my story started when I was about 3 years old. Everything in my life was fine. I was born to a very loving family. My parents are pastors. They love the Lord. They walk their talk. I wasn't one of those kids that would say, oh, my parents lived one way, on the pulpit, and then they were different at home. No, there was harmony. There was congruence. They walked their talk, and they genuinely loved God. They loved people. They raised us in the way of the Lord. My parents affirmed me a lot, so I grew up in an affirming environment. It was a, great family. I'm the second of 3 children, and everything was fine. My parents, like I was saying, are people lovers. They love people so much. And because of that, we had so many people who stayed with us when we were growing up. Add to the fact that they were ministers. They were always helping one person or the other, which meant that we were somehow susceptible to broken people, because broken people will break other people and hurting people will hurt people, right? So we had so many people who either lived with us or who had unrestrained access into our home. And I feel like the enemy latched on to that, the love that my parents had for people. And he just saw me and thought, this girl, there's something about her. Let's go and sow a seed of corruption, that will manifest later on in her life. And I remember that I was 3 years old when I got molested by an auntie who lived with us. Now, she wasn't related to me biologically, but she was just one of those people that lived with us, and we just called everybody auntie, uncle, right? And I was 3 years old. And people often ask me, how is it that you remember something that happened to you when you were 3 years old? Because at 3, your memory is still, you're still developing your cognitive skills and all of that. But, psychologists would say that the events that have the most significant impact on a person are the ones that occur when that child hasn't yet developed the language to express what they're feeling. So even though I was only 3 and I don't even have the memory so vividly, I remember bits and pieces of it. I remember where we were, and I remember that experience. I remember knowing that something was off, something was wrong, but I didn't have the vocabulary yet to express it, right? And so that was the enemy sowing a seed of corruption in my childhood. And what that went on to morph into was that I grew up with feelings of shame and guilt. It's what a lot of abuse victims face, and many people who even carry that feeling of shame and guilt around for no apparent reason. Some of them, you find that they were abused in their childhood, and so I carried a lot of guilt, shame, embarrassment. I had trust issues, growing up. Now, I couldn't connect as I grew up. I didn't know that it was this abuse and, some of the other experiences, which we'll talk about, that was manifesting, But there was that relational difficulty, just trust issues and suspicion, and just feeling like a stranger in my own life, And so there was that experience. And then I had other molestation experiences. Now, there was the very first experience I had was with a woman, right? And then as I grew older, a bit older, I had other molestation experiences with all these other uncles who lived in my house, And so there was a lot of confusion. And that's what the enemy also planned, sexual disorientation and confusion as I grew up. And the feeling of shame and guilt further intensified, and the feeling of, just having a low sense of worth, a low self-esteem. All of that was perpetuated through that abuse. Now, the enemy would then go on to layer on that abuse. And this was what happened. As I grew older and it was time to choose, when you're getting into SS1 and you have to then choose, are you going to sciences, arts? It was a no-brainer for me. I was very arts inclined, so I went into the arts class. Now, I have an elder brother. He did the sciences. My younger sister also eventually did sciences, But I was the only different one. I did arts. And back in my day, if you were an art student, you were not considered that smart, right? It was almost like you were an academic reject. It was the smart ones that went to science class. Those were the ones that got celebrated. Those were the ones that they pushed out for competitions, and all of that. And I remember that because my brother was also wearing the same school, he was the head boy during his set. So there was a lot of expectation from me, being his younger sister. And I remember that teachers, will be complaining and being like, what's wrong with you? Why are you in arts class? Look at your brother, science student, doing well, head boy, all of that. And I know that some of that gist went to my parents, and I'm thankful for my father because he fought for me and he was like, don't do that to my child. She's an art student, she's good at this. But there was pressure, from the school and all of that. And I remember going home one day with my report sheet. I didn't used to do very well in sciences. I would do great in English and all the other art subjects, but subjects like biology, you just see red. That time when you fail, they'll use red pen to write. And I remember going home one day with my report card, and there was this family friend of ours who was a principal in another school, and my dad had given him my report card to look at and say, hey, look at Tosin's report sheet. What do you think of it? And he took one glance at it and he said, oh, she's an average student. And that thing marked me significantly. It really, really affected my self-esteem because, there's a difference between saying this is an average performance and this is an average student. The first one speaks to the performance, what you can see on paper, which can be improved upon. The second one places a label on that child. So I took on that identity as average, and I never really thought I would be able to do something significant. That's the truth. That thing stuck. And it further solidified the thoughts that I already had been carrying from my abusive past, that I wasn't good enough anyway. I'm not that smart anyway. There's nothing special about me anyway, And so I continued to carry just this feeling of inadequacy. The third thing that I remember that marked me a lot and just continued to strengthen this false narrative I was telling myself was back then, we always had rosters for morning devotion in my house. So every day, everyone knew, when they were leading prayers and preaching the word in the morning. It was one of the ways my parents built us spiritually, not just the biological children, but even the other people that lived with us. And so that day, it was going to be my turn to preach. And I remember that the night before, I spent a lot of time studying, praying, preparing, because I must not preach rubbish. I was ready. I must have been somewhere around maybe 10, 11 or so. And I went for morning devotion the next day, ready to dish out my sermon. And I don't know what I said, but apparently I goofed. But hey, what do you expect from a child, right? And then all these my older people in my house, all these uncles, especially the men, they started laughing at me. I was embarrassed. They laughed and laughed and laughed. I don't know if I concluded the sermon that day, but it marked me. And do you know that from that day onwards, I struggled with speaking up? Apart from the fact that they laughed so much in that morning, I remember that for many weeks or even months afterwards, every time I passed by or they passed by me, they would say that thing I said and they would laugh. And so I felt very embarrassed. I felt like I didn't have anything sensible to say in this life. Like I was meant to be silent. That thing marked me so much that even after I had grown to become an adult, even when I was working, I would be so afraid to speak up in meetings. Guess what? Those people were not trying to be mean to me. They were just catching trips. It was supposed to be fun. But the enemy is so crazy. Something that is supposed to be comedy, he will take it and he can use it to perpetuate tragedy in the life of a person. He will latch onto it and he will create a whole stronghold that will cause you to sabotage yourself in life. So I wouldn't speak up in meetings. I remember my boss would call me those days and be like, you're not even that quiet on a normal day. It's not like you are shy like that. Why don't you ever speak up in meetings? But I didn't know. It took a while for me to understand. And then as the Holy Spirit began to show me that there is a link between your childhood, the occurrences in your childhood and this thing that you are living out, but I was so mute. I felt like people would laugh at me if I ever said anything and I would say rubbish. I didn't have anything important to say. And I would later realize that the enemy tried to steal my words because he could see that God had given me a voice. And that's what he does. When he sees God has given you a voice, he will try to silence you as early as possible. And I would say that one of the most effective, albeit counterintuitive ways to discover your life's purpose is to ask, where have I been attacked the most? Where have I been attacked the most? There's purpose there. There's purpose in that attack. There's purpose in that confusion. There's purpose in that pain. Now I know that God has given me a voice and the enemy wanted to silence that, And so that morphed. And I didn't know. I loved God genuinely. I grew up, went to university. I was doing great. I was in the word study unit. I was leading fellowship. People looked up to me. I have friends who would say, multiple friends actually, who would say, Tosin, it's because of you that I excelled academically. It's because of you that I'm such a confident person. It's because of you that I learned to use my voice. Meanwhile, I was dying inside. So you can have a whole identity crisis and be inspiring other people. You can have identity crisis and be helping other people discover their own identity. Because even you are not aware that something is going on. So I was busy inspiring people, busy leading prayers, So I was busy doing all this amazing stuff. Yet a seed of inferiority had been sown inside me and it was just waiting for the perfect time to bloom. I had a thriving relationship with God, and that's why I say you can know God and have a relationship with God and still be so broken in your soul. And there's a seed of pain, seed of low self-esteem, seed of low self-confidence, just waiting for the right time to blossom. And if you don't deal with it, it will come for you. If you don't deal with it, it will deal with you eventually. It's only a matter of time, So I had this great life going on in school and all of that, but I didn't even know. If someone had told me that I had confidence issues, I might have argued. Because it didn't seem apparent, right? I was doing so great on the outside, but it was there. It was always there. If I think about it, it was always there. There was just always this feeling of discomfort, this feeling of not being enough, this feeling of if people really see who I am, they might reject me, they might leave me, And so I went through uni, I went through NYSC, I even had a wonderful relationship. I thought I was going to get married. I won an award when I was graduating, Take Home to Mama Award.
Wow.
I mean, a whole wife material. I probably thought I was going to be the first to get married, I didn't know that there was a whole journey that was awaiting me. I had this fantastic relationship. I thought right after NYSC I would get married, but it didn't work out because we were both, AS genotype, so we had to end the relationship at some point. And that was the beginning of my downward spiral, because I was also mad at God. I was like, God, you brought this wonderful guy into my life. And I initially thought he was AA. That's what we thought. I'd asked that question. It's not like I was oblivious and but somehow we discovered that, he was actually wrong, right? I was like, God, how can you bring such a wonderful person into my life? I've loved you all my life. I've served you. I've been a good girl despite all the things that happened to me, and this relationship doesn't work out, So I had some level of bitterness against God and all of that. And boom, the enemy latched onto that. And then all the seed that had been sown in the past started to manifest. And I met this guy, tall, dark, handsome, smooth talker, well-spoken, really fine boy. All these boys that are almost like too good to be true, right? And because I didn't have a good self-esteem or good sense of worth, I found myself in a place where I was thinking, wow, this guy is this great and he's interested in me. Me. What am I doing with my life? Let's just be following him now. How can a guy this good on the outside, how can he be so interested in me? So I was seeking validation. He seemed to be fulfilling something that I was missing in my life. He seemed to be giving, just the thought of being in a relationship with him was giving me a sense of validation that I didn't have on my own, and I knew that I had no business being in that relationship. I'm a pastor's child. This guy didn't even attend church. It was me that was now trying to say, even if you are not born again like that, at least go to church. Now, me, I'm a pastor's child. You can't be like this, go to church. At least go to church, at least, And so, even though there were red flags everywhere, and that's what wounds in your souls, in our souls do, you will see the red flags, but the wounds in your soul will urge you to continue. It will be as if you are possessed. And that's why I say don't insult anybody that is in an abusive relationship. No, they're not stupid. There's a subconscious programming that is pushing them to act the way they're acting, that is pushing them to ignore the red flags and continue. There's something there. And that was the case with me. And so I started this relationship with him, and I remember just being so possessed by these soul wounds, that this guy would suggest things to me and he would not even be pushy about it. He would just make suggestions in very mild manners, and he would say stuff like, for instance, how can you say that you're in a relationship with someone and you're not having sex with them? How do you prove that you love that person? Like, sexual intimacy is the proof of love. He would say it so calmly. So isn't that contrary to everything I've always known? Contrary to what I've been taught, contrary to what I have taught others. So I knew the truth. I was raised well, but the wounds in my soul incapacitated me, right? And I remember initially arguing and being like, no, I'm a child of God. I can't do this and all of that. And he would just, casually and calmly argue his points logically. And it was only a matter of time before I compromised. And this was me, the girl who had been judgmental of other people. I was that girl, very critical of other people. When I was in school, I'll hear that a girl is in a relationship with a guy and there's sex involved. And you were automatically in my bad books. Like, I was just be giving you one kind of eye, like, you don't know, you are going to hell. You know, I was judgmental. You know, I was very self-righteous. You know, I prided. I was very, very, very self-righteous. And so I then became this person who was doing things and much more, things that I would have condemned other people for. And I remember just knowing that I had started to walk away and drift away from God, but I could not find my way out. I didn't know how to come out of it. And so I was in this crazy relationship with this guy, but I had a different persona. I was still the pastor's girl. I still sat in the front row seats. I still raised my hand in worship, you know, and did all the stuff. But I was pretending. Personally, I say I don't have a problem with someone who is struggling with sin and who comes to church and worships. Of course, that's where you should be. But in my case, I wasn't struggling. I was legit being pretentious, you know. And so that relationship continued, that very immoral relationship. And I remember we had started clubbing. Yeah. I'd never seen the four walls of a club before until I met this man. I started clubbing. There were wild parties, you know, all of that. Nobody knew I was living this life. Not my friends, not my parents, not any of the people I was staying with, you know. We had started doing all these things, going out and all of that. And I remember following him to a party one day. And this guy brought out a cigarette and started smoking. Flourish. I'm a pastor's child. I never imagined that I could be in a relationship with somebody who would hold a cigarette. I always thought people like that were bad, wicked, you know, the whole mindset. So I was shocked, and he had never discussed it with me. I didn't even expect it. I knew he drank, but I didn't know that he smoked. And I remember him smoking and his eyes turning red. This guy was a pro, so it's not even as if he was being pressured. He was clearly a smoker. And I was just so shocked. And I remember after that party having that conversation with him, like, guy, I didn't know that you smoked. You never told me. And he was, you know, again, as calmly as he would, he was like, you know, this is not something that I do often. It's just something that I do socially. Yeah, maybe once a year. I don't smoke much. I'm not addicted to it. It's nothing to be worried about. You know, he said stuff like that. At that point, my head was telling me, run, Tosin, run. You should not be in this relationship, but my feet felt stuck because I didn't have a personal sense of worth, and I had lost my sense of power and agency. The power to determine the course of my life and actually go in that direction. I'd lost it because I had these wounds in my soul and these needs that this guy was meeting. And after that whole smoking situation, by this time, I think I had introduced him to my parents. I'd taken him home. My parents don't live in Lagos, you know, so I'd taken him home. My parents are praying people. They didn't agree. They didn't see anything in the physical, but I know that I was trying to convince them for the longest time, especially my mom. She said, no, this guy. No, she was unconvinced, but I kept saying, no, he's a good guy. He's a great guy. They were not convinced. Anyway, after the smoking ordeal, I went home to visit my parents, and my mom called me aside. She said, Tosin, I had a dream. I said, this woman has come. Josephine, okay, tell us the dream. And then she said, in this dream, I saw this guy that you are dating. He was smoking cigarettes. And as he smoked, his eyes were red. He had smoke coming from his nose, from his mouth. She described the exact thing that happens when this guy smokes. But she went further. She said there was smoke in his ears and all of that. That one, I feel like there was maybe a spiritual connotation to that. So she was seeing beyond the physical. She was seeing him in the spirit, right? So I said, Mommy, no, it's not true. What you have seen is a lie. But my heart was beating fast. I was like, God, how can you go and tell on me like that? How can you give us such an accurate vision? My heart was beating, but I convinced her otherwise. I said, No, you didn't see well. It's not true. No, that's not true. But guess what? The moment I got back to Lagos, once I got back to Lagos, I went to his house. Hello, sir. My mother has seen a vision, an accurate one. I can't continue this relationship with you. I need to end this relationship. This guy convinced me. He said, wow, I'm sorry. I'll never hold a cigarette in my life again. The last time was the last time. Please don't leave. He said all these things. And I agreed. But we all know that change that is not internally motivated is not sustainable. And so it was only a matter of time before he went back to smoking. And again, I couldn't leave the relationship. But it didn't end at smoking cigarettes. One day I went with him to his friend's house, one weekend like this that I had escaped with him. And then he brought out something that looked like a cigarette, but it was shaped differently. That was the first time in my life that I saw what is called weed, marijuana. I said, what's going on? I thought cigarettes was the worst. This guy actually smokes weed and he smokes it like a pro. Again, it's not even a newbie to this thing. And I remember just sitting there beside him, frozen. He was not even afraid. He just in my presence like that. And he was smoking. And then he started to school me on what he was smoking. He even gave me the botanical name. He said, Tosin, this is cannabis sativa. It's a plant. It's medicinal. It's not dangerous. He said something like, cigarettes are dangerous and I'll never ever let you smoke cigarettes. As if he owned my life, right? I'll never let you smoke cigarettes. But weed is actually good. And he said, I want you to try it. And I tried it. And I started coughing. I was coughing and just coughing profusely.
What?
Yes. I was coughing and he was like, yes, that's usually about how it goes. You cough in the beginning because it's your first time. It gets easier. And so I took more drugs. I took more puffs. And it actually started to get easier. So he was literally tutoring me in iniquity. And so that's how I started smoking weed.
Wow.
Yeah. And from then on, it became a part of our lifestyle. Like it was part of our relationship. We would smoke weed. I would ask whenever I was going to his house, I'd be like, is there weed? Do you need to buy? Do we need to buy? I would follow him I got exposed to those dark street corners where weed was sold. I got exposed to the game and, I saw how, they often hid and sold this thing and I saw everything live and it became a normal part of our life and relationship. Mind you, I was still going to church. I was still doing all the right things. I still looked like the good girl, perfect girl.
But at this point, you were not at home, right?
I wasn't at home. I was living with another family in Lagos. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And Flourish, that's not the worst. That's not the craziest part of the story. I just remember feeling like I'm so far gone and nobody knows. I might as well just keep going. This guy would have parties in his house. People would come. His friends would come. Everyone would be smoking weed. It was crazy, right? And I remember being with him at the house of one of his family members. And he said to me, Tosin, I'm thinking we should do something that would forge a stronger bond for us.
God.
I said, I don't understand. What do you mean by forge a stronger bond? There's already sex involved. We're partying like crazy. I'm smoking weed with you. I don't know how many couples smoke weed together. That's already crazy enough. I've even taken on some of your character traits. It was that bad. He used to be very temperamental. In fact, when I met his mom, that was the first thing she asked me. Are you aware of his temperament? Are you aware that he gets very angry? And I said, I know. And by then, even I had taken on some of his... I'm naturally a very calm person, very cool, very patient, very gentle. But I had become a different person. You see, I say that there are things you can prevent by using birth control pills, and all of these other forms of protection. You can prevent pregnancy, you can prevent sexually transmitted diseases. But if you want to prevent yourself from contracting sexually transmitted spirits, Abstinence is the only way, because they bypassed every form of protection. So I had taken on so much of his character already. I said, what do you then want again? And he said to me something like, you getting pregnant and getting rid of the pregnancy.
What?
Yeah. That reaction. That's
Like,
the reaction
why?
every time. That's the reaction every time. Why? Who suggests that?
That's deep.
What we know is that people make mistakes and then they get pregnant and they get confused. Like, what do we do? What do we do? I can't go home with this pregnancy. And then they are forced. They make the worst mistakes of their lives, and then they've made rather the worst mistakes of their lives in their opinion, and they go on to maybe have an abortion. You hardly ever hear someone suggest that get pregnant and then terminate it for me. Of course, I had that reaction that you had. I said, no, you must be out of your mind. You must be crazy. How can you even suggest this? How can you bring this up? What effrontery? How can you even have the guts to say a thing like that? It's crazy enough to ask me to get pregnant for you before marriage. That in itself is a crazy request. But to say get pregnant and then terminate it, you must be mad. But again, words are seeds. That was the last time he brought it up. It was a seed that he spoke. And because we had such an environment where that kind of negative seed could blossom, it was only a matter of time. I didn't intentionally do it. I didn't intend to get pregnant at any point, but it happened. And I remember that day heading to the pharmacy and getting a kit fearfully because I'd missed my period. And I was like, oh my God, don't tell me this actually happened. I refused it. I rejected it. I didn't agree to it. But if you're in an environment, a seed in a fertile soil, it will bloom, right? And I remember just saying, God, don't tell me this is happening. And I checked, and the result was positive. I was pregnant. Me, a pastor's child. My parents are leading ministers in the ministry where they serve. How would I take it home? People say, oh, pastors' kids are the worst, and all of that. And I do agree that a pastor's child is maybe 10 times more likely to commit an abortion than one that isn't, because of the shame involved. Your parents may even lose their jobs, you'll be ostracized. You might not even be allowed to step into the church, to step into your home, and all of that. And you just don't want to face that shame. And so I had all those thoughts. What if my mother has a heart attack and dies because of me? How would they take this? And so I remember calling him and saying, look, this has happened. I'm pregnant. What? And then he calmly asked me over the phone, what do you want to do? Didn't he instigate the whole thing? And I said, but you already know the answer, right? You know that I can't do this. I don't know what to do. I can't take that. Actually, I wasn't confused. At that point in my life, I was like, I can't take this home, And then I had a procedure. And then I remember coming back from that procedure and weeping. Weeping so much. Not just for the loss of my baby, but for the loss of myself. I said, Tosin, who are you? How did you get here? Who is this girl? I had lost any form of recognition that I had for myself. I didn't know who I was. Who is this?
Like coming from being so spiritual in
Yes.
school, loving God, leading prayer, word study. Like
Yes.
I totally know, I can imagine that. And then,
who is this? And so I remember just crying and from then on, after that whole situation, things just took a downward spiral in my relationship. He became emotionally abusive. He was already that. I mean, he had all those signs, but it became worse because he felt like he had me wrapped around his finger because I'd done this crazy stuff for him. I remember him saying to me one time that I know that you can never leave me, even if I sleep with a family member of yours. You can't leave me. He felt like my whole world revolved around him. And to an extent, it was true because he had become the custodian of everything that I had now come to know as life. And so I couldn't leave. I felt powerless really to leave. And then I remember it was my birthday one day and we were constantly fighting. We had all this because he was very emotionally abusive. He would say stuff to me. I would cry. He had said to me before that, Tosin, you're such an easy target. Like, it's so easy to make you cry. It's so easy, and I would just cry a lot. Or again, brokenness in your soul, And I remember that it was my birthday and we had gotten into another fight. He had said some things. I was crying. We had gone to dinner. I was crying. I was just tired of the whole fight. And in between my tears and my sadness, he brings out a ring. And he says, well, will you make me the happiest man in this life and marry me? He didn't even go down on one knee.
Sounds like a movie.
I was weeping. I was sad. Will you marry me? Will you... Flourish, that should have been my perfect moment to say. Because we had even just had a fight to say, no, I'm not doing it again. I'm leaving. I agreed though, my sister. I said yes. I collected ring. I took picture with tears in my eyes. I posted it on my BBM. That time was BlackBerry status. Everybody would see. We looked like a picture perfect couple. We were a picture perfect couple. Just this cute little couple. People would say stuff like, hey, cute babies alert, cute babies loading, that kind of thing. So I put it up, and I remember people really congratulating me and all of that. How did you feel? And I was sharing, how I cried a lot, but it was not even tears of joy. It was actually tears of sadness. There were tears that came from a place of realizing that I was about to be bound. I knew. Do you get? Some people are bound, but they don't know. No, me, I was aware. I knew that I was about to walk into bondage, but I was powerless to leave. That's what happens when you have unhealed wounds in your soul. Fragmented souls. I didn't share this with anyone. Everybody thought my life was going perfectly. People had even been asking me, this guy, when is he going to propose to you? So there was even pressure coming from people who genuinely loved me and were supporters of our relationship, And so I remember just now being engaged, but being sad about my engagement and not being able to tell anybody because, again, I liked the idea of people thinking that my life was perfect. It's one of the symptoms of having a broken soul. The need to have a picture-perfect life. Inability to be vulnerable with someone and say, look, things are not going well. You need to help me. I'm in a mess. I need help. I couldn't say that to anybody. So I was sad all by myself. And I remember one morning taking a shower and crying and saying, God, that was my first time that I remember that I cried out to God in that relationship because I'd strayed so far. And I was like, God, are you going to watch me marry this guy? I need help. I know I need to get out, but I don't know how to get out. I know I need to leave. I can't raise my kids in an environment like this. Imagine raising kids and people are coming to smoke weed in your house. What kind of legacy am I? I knew the right things, And I was just crying out to God. I was like, God, help me. By this time, he was, also verbally abusive. Like, I'm a slim lady, right? And I've always been like that, and he would body shame me for my slimness. Like, we would be driving on the road and he'd be looking at one, voluptuous person. I'd be like, that's my kind of babe right there. Yes. And he'd be telling me stuff like, you need to eat more. You need to eat so that you can gain weight. And all of that. So he was further breaking my spirit, diminishing me, whatever was left of my already depleted self-esteem. He sucked it. And what that did to me was make me feel like nobody else could love me. Because if you say that I'm this bad and you are in a relationship with me, then why will I leave, right? He had even said it to me before. That if you leave this relationship, no one will really love you like I will. Tactics to keep me bound. So I cried out to God and said, Lord, you have to help me. You have to help me. And I think that day, something shifted. Even though I didn't really see anything on the outside, I feel like God had a conference call with the angels and said, look, this is our daughter. She has now cried out for help. This is an emergency situation. We have an emergency rescue operation to go on. And I'm sure the angels would have said something like, okay, so how do we save this your daughter now? Because as she is, she doesn't have any power of her own. Even if we want to help her, she doesn't even have the power to walk, to crawl out of this relationship. So how do we get her out? And God would have said something like, I know, guys, I know. But what we would do is, it's only love, it's only man that we can use to rescue her. That's all that is in her head right now, because that's where she gets currently her sense of validation from. So if it takes us sending another person into her life to distract her from that relationship, we'll do it. And that's what happened. So I met another guy I met him at a youth program, and we became friends. And then I started to see what was possible in God. That guy God didn't bring him into my life to be my husband. God brought him as a deliverer. And I remember telling my brother then that, look, I met one guy who he's very correct, God-loving, intelligent, tongue-talking, worded, and also doing well in his career. I was telling my brother that, I'm just so grateful. I feel like this guy is the guy for me and all of that. My brother said to me, don't confuse the message with the messenger. God might have sent him to bring you out of something, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's your husband. Me, I didn't listen. No. I was like, this is the guy for me. So the more I became friends, now we were not dating, but the more...
Had you left this other guy?
No.
Okay.
The story of my leaving is a supernatural intervention. I love that these guys are laughing. Oh my God. So I was like, I've seen a correct guy. I started to see what was possible in God, and then it started to strengthen me and help me see that, Tosin, you're actually better than this. So
you don't have to be
stuck here. Look at a correct person. They're actually godly guys, and this other guy, this godly guy, he also respected me a lot. He was gentle. He was kind. He respected me. I was like, what have I been doing all my life? And then this new guy through him, I started falling in love with God again. I started attending vigils. I started attending prayer sessions. The things that I had stopped doing, I started doing them again. We would talk about our goals, the future, and just all that great stuff. And it felt so good. All of a sudden, I started losing appetite for this other relationship. I started gaining strength, And then one day I was like, it's time. I'm going to end this relationship. So that day, I didn't even wear my engagement ring to work. I removed it, I put it in one corner of my bag. I was ready for a fight. I'd said once I closed, I'll go to his house and go and break up with him. And that was what I did. I went to his house after work. I said, we need to have a conversation. And I was like, okay, tell me about it. I had the plan in my head, what I would tell him. I wasn't going to say, I want to break up with you. I would say something that would make him say, get out, leave my life. That was my plan. So I went to him and said something like, look, I've really been, pressing into God a lot more these days, and the way he's leading me, this is a no-brainer. I'm a child of God, and the things that we've been doing, I'm not supposed to even be doing them. For instance, there can be no sex in this relationship. It's ungodly, it's unholy. If we're going to continue in this relationship, we have to do it in a holy way. We have to pursue righteousness. I was telling this to somebody that did not have a relationship with God. The guy was just looking at me like, what's wrong with this one? And what I predicted happened, because that ticked him off. He was very upset. He started shouting, how dare you? What's the meaning of this? What do you mean by this? In fact, give me my ring now. So I opened up my bag, because I came prepared, brought out the ring and handed it to him. And he said, Tosin, you're actually giving me back my ring. The power dynamics had changed. He never believed that I had the power or the audacity to hand him back that ring. Meanwhile, before he asked for his ring back, he was so upset. He was livid. I'd never seen him that angry. He was so upset, he got up and punched the fan that was beside me, and I watched that fan break into pieces. That day, I said, God, you have delivered me from something. Because maybe if we were married, it's my face that would have, collected that punch. So I gave him the ring. Tosin, how can you return? I said, but you asked for it. You asked for it, and that's why I'm giving it to you. By this time, it was already really late in the night. I was like, I need to go home now. Please, can you take me home? Because it was really late, maybe almost midnight, So he drove me home, but I think he didn't collect the ring from me. So I dropped it on his sofa, but he thought I took it back. He dropped me at home and then came back home to see the ring on the sofa. He thought I had taken it home with me. And then he called me, or he sent me a message that you actually left the ring here. You left the ring here. And then he came the next day to see me, and his eyes were puffy. He had been crying. He was looking disheveled. He was looking like a shadow of himself. I'd never seen him that broken. He's always the one with the, so you like me like this in this life. He was like, don't leave. He was crying. He was really, really weeping. And guess what? My sister, I took the ring again. Sorry. I took it again, but God was already working. Oh no, God was working. Because the moment I took that ring back, I lost my peace. Any peace that I had known in the last couple of months of meeting this godly guy, I lost everything. I lost all the peace. And then God said, you can't be here anymore. You have to leave this relationship. And so the next time I was going to have that conversation, I went with having a different frame of mind. I went knowing that this is actually warfare for my destiny. I went prayerfully. I went with accountability. For the first time, I shared what has been going on with someone. If you want deliverance, you must be ready to open yourself up to a trusted person. So I reached out to like an uncle of mine who didn't live in the country. I said, this is what has been going on with me. I need you to pray with me, stand with me in prayers. I'm going to end this relationship. Hold me accountable. And that's what he did. So I remember just prayerfully going. This time not with a fight. I wasn't going to fight. I was just going prayerfully. And so I called him and said, look, can we meet at a restaurant after work? He said, okay. And then we sat in the restaurant and I just laid it before him. I said, look, I'm a shadow of myself. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm far from God. This is not the life I was called to. I need to find myself again. I need to discover myself again. I can't be here. I had that conversation. And then I was wearing the ring. I removed it from my finger and I put it in his palm. And he asked me for a minute and then he went outside and he went to cry. And my friend said to me, Tosin, those tears were tears from the kingdom of darkness because they realized that they had lost their grip over your soul. And so, that was it. That was the beginning of my liberation. There was still a lot of work for God to do. You remember, I still had all those wounds in my soul that God hadn't dealt with. But that was the beginning of my deliverance from a pit that was sent to swallow me. And I remember by this time now being really close to this new guy. Of course, he was not the one God had for me. That we eventually dated, but it didn't last long because, again, God loves his son too much to give him a damaged girl. So God was preserving his son. His mission had been accomplished. But I remember leaving that relationship and still knowing that there was still a lot of, brokenness in my soul, and all of that. I was still struggling, There was also the aftermath of the breakup. He tried to get messy. He did, just crazy stuff. And I still had so much going on in my life. I remember, though, the day that I had an encounter with God. It was the 26th of August, 2013. I was riding to work in an Uber. And I suddenly felt a presence, an overwhelming presence. And a wave literally just hit me and I started to cry. I started to weep. I wailed in the backseat of that Uber. I'm surprised that the Uber driver didn't ask me what was wrong. It's either his ears were supernaturally stopped to my crying or he was just a really mean person that didn't care about his passenger, but I cried so much that day. And in my tears, I began to pray in tongues. And then God started to give me an interpretation.
Was this sudden or was this after like prayers or was this?
It wasn't after prayers. I wasn't praying. I was just on my way to work. I was just trying to find myself back, in the faith, and all of that. It just happened spontaneously. And then God started to speak to me, and he said something like, I saved you so you could serve me. Don't commonize your deliverance. Not everyone who falls into this kind of pit is able to come out. A lot of people get into it and they are never able to come out. Your escape is supernatural. Your escape is by divine intervention, and it's for a purpose. I saved you so you could be my own hands of deliverance for other people. That was the day that I knew that I would write a book. I didn't know how much detail I would go into. I didn't know all of that, but I knew that I was called to give my entire story, my life, my essence to God, And as I said those words, as I just submitted to the Lord in the car that day, I started to feel the weight, the burden lift off. That was God making his proposal known to me. That was God calling me, even though I was still broken. That was God qualifying me, even though I was unqualified. That was God reaching out to me, even though I felt broken. And you know why? God didn't see me as broken, even in that moment. He didn't see me as broken, so he wasn't communicating to me like I was broken. In that moment, he saw me as healed. But he also saw me as a healer. He saw me as delivered, and he also saw me as a deliverer. He saw me as liberated, and he also saw me as one who would bring liberation to people, And so I just felt so light that day, and it was beautiful. And that's the thing about God, qualifying the unqualified. Isn't that just so wonderful, how our God is? That he calls the things that be not as though they are. He sees your healing when all you see is brokenness. God is just so good. And I'd like to tell you that everything from then on was rosy, and I eventually, afterwards, became this firebrand person that was delivering people. But no, my sister, I still had like 2 other failed relationships. I was going from relationship to relationship because there was still brokenness in my soul. I was hopping from relationship to relationship. I could not leave one relationship until there was another person in the picture, because I was still yearning for something. I was like that woman at the well who was thirsty and drinking from this well of relationships that could never satisfy her. That was what I was doing. And they couldn't satisfy. Something would always happen. There'll be a breakup. Somehow that was the Lord shielding me, because he knew you're not ready for marriage. You're not, and you will also go and ruin another person's son. So I kept meeting brick walls in the area of relationship. I was almost saying, Abi, there's something wrong. Is there a course we need to go and break, and all of that, because the cycle was it was a lot. And I remember just being in this final relationship where the Lord eventually arrested me. I was driving to work. I had just arrived at work, in fact. I lived on the mainland, worked on the island, so I would often leave my house very early, sometimes 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m., and get to work. It would still be dark. I would sleep in the car before 8 o'clock going to work. And then I had arrived very early that morning. It was dark, and I wanted to sleep, but I just couldn't sleep. Sleep eluded me. I could not find sleep. And then I felt that wave again. But this time it was a wave of sadness. Sometimes we think, experiencing the presence of God will always come as warm, fuzzy feelings, love it. No, sometimes it can come as sadness, depending on the work the Lord is trying to accomplish in you. So it was sadness. I was sad. I cried. I was feeling the sadness in the heart of the Father. That's why it came that way to me. So I was weeping. I was crying. I was like, God, what is this about? And then I felt like God finally had my attention, because I ugly cried. It was bad. I was wailing, shouting in my car. Thank God my windows were rolled up. And then I started to hear the Lord speak to my heart. And he said to me, he asked me a question. He said, Tosin, how many more relationships will it take for you to realize that I'm the only one that can satisfy you? He said, you've known me all your life. You were raised to know me. You've even loved me. You've preached about me. You shared about me. But you've never come to me for the healing of your soul, for the cleansing of your heart. So much has happened in your life, and you never came to me. You never trusted me enough to love you to healing and wholeness. And you kept going around and searching for these things everywhere. Wow. It made sense. And in the car that day, I just surrendered. I said, God. And it's funny because there was no third party. You know, some people have stories of maybe somebody came and preached to them or spoke to them, whatever. No, but these ones they were just these conversations between me and the Holy Spirit. And I said, I get you. I said to the Lord, I said, this relationship I'm in now, I'm going to go and break it up. And remember, I said I would always have to have another person before I could break up with one person. This time, there was no other person inside. So I said, I will break up this relationship. And I went and I ended that relationship without another guy inside. For the first time in my life, I was single and okay. The Lord and I were still going to walk through a lot together in terms of healing, but I was on that journey. I was single and I didn't feel like something was off in my life. I was okay to tell people that I didn't have a boyfriend. And it did not mean that I was not desirable, or I was not pretty, or I was not okay. I was all right. So for the next couple of months, I was in a good kind of isolation. It was just me and the Lord. I was letting him heal me. He became my romantic partner. He became my lover. He became my healer. He was teaching me. He was schooling me. He was healing my soul, showing me my identity distortions. You know, I remember I would read Joyce Meyer books. I would listen to Heather Lindsay. You know, that woman spoke hard truths. Like, it was like she was sent to me. I was just alone with God for quite a while, maybe a period of about 3 months. And towards the end of those 3 months, I remember journaling, specifically surrendering my relationship life to the Lord and saying, God, I know you've given us a right to make choices with regards to who we want to marry. But you see me as I am like this. It's clear from my history that I'm likely to make a mistake if you leave that decision to me. I said, God, please, I relinquish my right to choose my life partner. Please choose for me. Just like you chose the wonderful family into which I was born. Choose my spouse for you. I said, God, I'll wait for you. Even if I have to wait the next 10 years, I'll wait. Even if I have to wait an eternity, I'll wait until you make your presentation. Guys came to me in that season. It was almost like God was testing me on this. I did not agree. I didn't date anybody. I was not interested, except I had a leading from the Lord. I was very, very intentional, you know. So I did this submission prayer and handed my relationship and, you know, marital life to the Lord, saying, even if it takes 10 years, right? Exactly 23 days after, I met the man that is now my husband. God wants to bless us more than we know, but he loves us too much to bless our dysfunction. Because our dysfunction will not only ruin us, it will ruin other people. So all along, all I needed to do was really be trusting God and really be submitted to him, you know. And so I met this man that would now become my husband. I wasn't needy. I wasn't wanting any relationship like that. So I went with my clear head, asked the right questions, you know, and did everything. And it turned out that this was really the man that God had for me. And I said, God, you're so good. And I want to honor you. I want to honor you so much because of where I'm coming from. And that's what the love of God does to you. It makes you want to live for him. It's not a fear of God that leads you to righteousness. No, it's a revelation of the love of God. I was like, God is so good. God, you are so good to me. I want to live for you. Nobody has to cajole me. Nobody has to force me. I don't have to be coerced. It's flowing from the abundance of my revelation of your love for me. I want to love you back in a way that means something to you. So I want to honor you with my body, despite everything that has happened in the past. And I said to God, I'm not going to let anybody touch me, you know, or do anything. I even said, God, I wrote in my journal, I don't even want to kiss the man that I will marry until on our wedding day. And I remember when my husband and I started dating, I didn't even bring it up with him. We were having a different conversation, and we were speaking over the phone. And he said to me, by the way, there won't be anything physical in this relationship. I will honor you. I will honor God. I will honor your body. I will not kiss you until we get married. When we pray according to the will of God, he listens. He hears us. And I was like, what? I didn't even have to bring this up. I didn't even have to say this. Of course, I had to tell my husband about my past and all of that. Yet he was so gracious, and he was like, we're all in need of mercy and grace in this life. And he was like, I'll honor you, I'll honor God. And he loved God enough to honor me. And then we walked down the aisle on our wedding day, and I walked spotless, radiant, the bride of Christ, knowing that I was without spot, without blemish, without wrinkle. My head was held up high because I was this person that God had beautified, transformed. And I was this person who was walking just in all purity. And that was it. That was it. And we had our first kiss at the altar, and it was just beautiful. I was just like, God, you're good. Look how you just turned my life around, turned my story around. And of course, a lot of healing work still happened. Healing is not an event. It's a journey. It's a process. It's a lifestyle. Even here and now, God is still taking me through, other levels of healing, right? Because it's a lifestyle. It's a journey that we're on. It's not as crazy as what it once was. Some of the things God might be dealing with me now are not apparent. They're just like, girl, let's go next level on this, your wholeness work. You can thrive without it. You can be okay without it. You can do okay without it. But he's like, no, I want you to really, really be, top notch there, like that. So that work is constantly ongoing, and God has even used my husband to bring other layers, deeper layers of healing, to my life. But God is just amazing. God is amazing.
Oh my God, this has been so good. For someone who is struggling right now and can resonate so much with your story, where do they start from?
The first thing that you need to know is that God is so in love with you. The crazy thing that we try to do is that when we're struggling, we feel like we're too dirty, too filthy, too unworthy to approach God. And so we run away from the very person that has the power to liberate us. If you're currently struggling with sin, you're struggling with an addiction, you're struggling with anything, you're in a relationship you shouldn't be in, the solution is never to run away from God. The solution is actually to stay in the presence. I think it's one of the biggest acts of faith that you're struggling, yet you stay in the presence of God. And you're like, it's me and you here, God. I will stay. I will let you heal me. I've come. Yes, it's me again. I've come. I'm here. Actually, I never left. You don't leave. You don't leave. Even in the thick of your mess, you don't leave. You stay. The enemy is going to come with accusations. Oh, he did that with me. I'd also been exposed to pornography, for instance, So I remember that I would struggle, and God had already been taking me on this healing journey. I would fall, even though I now had a thriving relationship with the Lord, and the enemy will come with accusations and be like, you better go. Don't stay here. You're filthy, and all of that. But I'll stay in the midst right after I messed up, rather than allow the voice of guilt and condemnation to take me out of God's presence. Immediately, I'll start confessing how righteous I am in Christ Jesus. I'll start confessing how loved I am. I'll start confessing how forgiven I am, how the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases and his faithfulness never runs to an end, how there is no condemnation for me, how I am loved. I would laugh about it right after I had messed up. The regular Christian might run after. It will be like, let me just leave God for now. And then when they feel like, okay, I'm doing better, I haven't fallen in like 3 days, then they will come back to God. No. Right after, I would be like, I'm so loved. I'm so forgiven. You know what that did to me? Or what that did for me? I started to see myself as such. And then I realized that I lost my appetite for those things because I genuinely confessed myself into believing that I'm righteous. And I was like, wait a minute, you're righteous. You can't do this kind of stuff. You're bigger than this. This is inferior to you. This is under your feet. And the moment the enemy realized that he could not trap me with condemnation and guilt, he lost its grip on me. It's that guilt and condemnation. That's where the trap is. Because you feel too filthy to approach God. So stay right there. Of course, find accountability. Reach out to someone, talk to someone about it. But the most important thing is to know that you are so loved by God. Is to come into a revelation of the love of God. He never leaves, not even in your thickest mess, not even when you're deep in the darkest of pits. He's there. He loves you. He desires you. He doesn't see you as filthy. He doesn't see you as condemned. He doesn't see you as the things that you're seeing yourself as. He doesn't see you as broken or damaged. He wants to love you back to wholeness. He wants to love you back to healing. He wants to love you back to life. He's actually waiting. He's waiting for you. He's so in love with you. That's the revelation that you need to come into. The love of God transforms and it conquers. It conquers all sin. It conquers all iniquity. It conquers you as a person. Yeah.
So you spoke about getting accountability.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody who feels like, where do I find this accountability? Like, it's something you hear a lot, but like, how do you find people that will not judge you, that will not spread your story around, that will not misinterpret what you're trying to do? Like, how exactly do you find good accountability?
That's such a valid question, because that was my fear for the longest time. If people know this, they will judge me. They will talk about it. They will spread the gist. Already I had trust issues that were stemming from my past, right? And it's a valid concern because these things are actually really sensitive, So as you walk that journey, it's something that you prayerfully do, And I know that these days, because people are now becoming more aware, and it's one of the things that I do, it's one of my favorite things to do, to create safe spaces for, women to heal, to find wholeness, to receive the forgiveness of the Father. So look out if there are communities like that around you, maybe small communities, where, you've heard testimonies of people saying, look, I went into this community, my life was changed. I found healing here. It was a no judgment zone here. Look out for communities like that, And sometimes God may highlight someone to you or spotlight someone to you and say, look, share with this person.
So don't just share like randomly.
Don't just share randomly. No, don't share randomly. I didn't share randomly, I prayerfully was led to that uncle of mine whom I then shared with and said, look, I'm breaking up this relationship. Keep me accountable. And of course, as I progressed on my life's journey, I then found other people whom I just knew that, I can trust this person. There'll be a witness in your heart that this person is trustworthy. This person can be trusted. But even these days, there are communities that are healing communities, small communities where you can actually find succor and just wholeness. So look out for those. Yeah.
Okay, so for somebody who is saying, like, I get what you've been through, I connect with your story, but is it really possible to go through all this? And maybe the person is even feeling like my own is still worse than your own, in spite of everything. Is it possible to go through all these things and still come out, like you said at the beginning, not looking like what you've been through?
Yeah. Just look at me. I love the reaction that people have every time they hear of my story, every time they read my book, because they're like, this is fiction. You are such a good storyteller, Tosin. And of course, I tell stories. I use a lot of storytelling in my book, but it was my story. I tell stories. I love telling stories, right? But it's my truth and it's my story. And I'm living proof. My life is that testimony of the power of God to deliver, to heal, to transform. And proof that there is no depth you can sink into that God's hands cannot reach into and bring you out of. I want you to know that the enemy meant it for evil, but God is able to turn it around for good. And I kind of feel like someone needs to hear that everything that you went through, God feels deeply for you. It wasn't God that orchestrated it, because people have grievances against God. Like, you watched me get abused. You were there where were you when this and this happened? God didn't orchestrate it. No, his heart broke when your heart broke. He was broken when your body was violated. We live in a broken world, and these things happen. And until everyone submits to the Lordship of Jesus, things like this will happen. Because there are some people who are just agents of darkness and instruments that have been sent to just destroy a life. So in this world, we will have troubles and we will go through situations, But God is the one who has come alongside you and wants to heal you and wants to free you from all your fears and wants to love you to wholeness, And when you let him do that, there is no one who really and truly surrenders their hearts, their pain, their past, their stories to God, that he doesn't make something phenomenal out of. For me, the enemy really thought that I was his target. But no, I was his trap. Mm. Because if he had known that I'll be here sitting with you in this interview session as a direct result of the things that he orchestrated, he wouldn't have touched me. And it's the same thing for you. It's the same thing for anybody else. He thinks you're a target because he's aware that you have a weighty destiny and there's a weighty calling on your life. And so he will do anything to get you to believe that you are beyond redemption. But that's a lie. Because God's arms are not too short to deliver you or to save you or to pull you out of any pit. You can rise. Tell me whatever it is. What is it? Abortions? You've been a drug addict? What is it? What is it? What is it? What could it possibly be? Nothing to God. If you would yield and believe that he loves you enough, he'll transform your life and he'll rewrite your story and he will send you as a deliverer for other people.
Wow. By the way, guys, everything that Tosin talks about is in her amazing book, Unchained. And even more, as you can see. She did not complete the story. So where can people get the book?
Okay, you can get the book on Roving Heights. I currently have very, very limited copies. You can go to my website as well, tosinsonny.com. But again, there are very, very limited copies. So, but even if you don't grab a physical copy, you can get it on Amazon. You can order it on Amazon, especially if you don't live in the country. You can always order that and get it in print. And then you can order it on Amazon Kindle as well. If you'd prefer other e-platforms, you can get it on BAM-Books. Yes, and your favorite e-book stores.
Okay, so let me ask, what eventually happened to the guy you were dating, the first guy?
The first guy.
Yes.
I know that he did get married not too long after our relationship ended. So after I had broken up and all of that, he did try to convince me to come back. And one of the ways he did that was he started, for instance, downloading a lot of gospel music on his, phone and laptop, and convincing me that, look, I now play gospel music. I'm now a child of God. He started going to church very often. He would even go for midweek services, so he became very involved. He started talking a lot of Christianese. He did a lot. But I knew that door was forever closed, and I know that he got married. I don't know how he is today. I'm not in touch with him. But I hope and I pray that he's doing excellently well.
And how about your parents? Like, did you ever tell them or did they find out in the book?
Ooh, that one.
And how did they?
When the Lord asked me to write the book, that was a big consideration, especially given my parents' status, and all of that. And I was like, how are we going to do this, God? But he said, write your book first. So I had the entire manuscript. I'd written it. It was during the COVID year. So
you were married at this point?
I was married at this point, yes. I'd been a couple of years married, So I had written the book. I had the manuscript. I'd sent it to my friend to proofread, Everything was going on. And then it was during the COVID year. The ideal thing would have been to go home to see my parents because they don't live in Lagos. But at that time, there were restrictions. You could not travel, and all of that. But I knew that I had to have that conversation. I owed them that honor and respect to have this conversation with them before publishing the book. So it was my dad that I called. Somehow the dads can take it a bit better. Or at least in my case, So I said, I will talk to my dad and then he will relay the message to my mom. So I called my dad and I said, Daddy, I have something to tell you. I remember I was walking on the streets. I left my house. I was pacing like, God, you have to help me. Praying in the Holy Ghost as I was calling. And then I downloaded everything that had happened from childhood to, the crazy parts of my story and all of that. And it was like, wow. And I think the first words he said was, I thank God for your life. Whew, relief. I thank God for your life. I'm grateful. I'm thankful that the story didn't end differently. He asked me a couple of questions. He wanted to know the specific people that were involved in the abuse. And I really wanted to shield him from that because he was only trying to help people. And he did not imagine that they would turn and, touch his child. So that part was hard. I had to give names. And I said, but Daddy, you can't take offense. You can't be angry. I said, I'm healed. That's why I'm sharing this story. God has turned this around for good. I've forgiven them. And then he said, if you've forgiven them, who am I to hold anything against them? I just thank God. I thank God for your life. I thank God for your story. I thank God for your journey. And I told him that I was writing a book about it. I wanted him to give his blessing to that. He even supported me. He blessed it. He even supported me financially, and all of that. And then he had to have that conversation with my mom. Of course, moms take it more personally because, hey, this is your child, your baby. You didn't know this thing was going on with her. It was harder, definitely harder on any mom, I can imagine, to be honest, and then you're going out and you're sharing this, it's like everything is coming in a rush, but we really walked through it with a lot of grace. My family members were supportive, my siblings,
Everybody was surprised to hear.
Everybody was surprised.
Especially, I feel like the most shocking part would probably be what happened after you left school.
Yes.
And once someone graduates, it's like this person is now an adult. Like they are set in their ways. I mean, nobody can come and introduce you
anything at this stage of your life.
At this stage of life, But did they? And they didn't know that was all these things were happening.
They didn't know. I mean, my mom had dreams. She had these revelations. She had a discomfort in her spirit about this person, but she didn't know the details. Apart from this one dream that she saw, quite accurately, she just knew that there's something here. There's something
what of your
here.
siblings?
But she didn't. My siblings, we didn't live together at that time. My brother was, I think, doing his master's abroad. And then I have a younger sister who was probably still in secondary school. My younger sister never liked the guy for no reason, but she just didn't,
But does it say something about, I know this conversation has been very long already, but it's very important. Does it say something about when you're in a relationship with someone and people around you don't necessarily approve of the person?
Yes.
Can you just talk about
Yes, it does. It says a lot. It says a lot, especially when you have spirit-filled people around you. You can't discount the opinion of people and say, because you see this love matter. Once you're in love, sometimes you will not see what you're supposed to see. So if you have multiple people who genuinely love and care about you, who are raising questions and concerns about this person that you're dating, it's worth listening to, paying attention to. Be open to counsel. The Bible says that in a multitude of counsel, there is safety. So it makes sense to actually listen because they want you to get married now. Nobody's what do they want to do with your unmarried self in their house? They want you to get married and do well, So you need to consider what people around you, especially people who love you and people who are led by the Spirit, are saying. It was one of the things that God told me after I had left that relationship. He said to me, Tosin, one of the proofs that you're ready to get married is that you're also ready to let go. Like when you meet someone and things seem to be going great, you must be so flexible with my spirit that if I start to put a discomfort in your heart, whether through the comments of your parents, people who love you, you are not in a place where you are defensive and you're like, you don't know him. It said that is proof that something is still wrong here. You're still you have to be in a place where you're like, God, if this is not you, I won't be there. That posture of heart must be there. That's the only way you actually be open to counsel. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so for people who want to connect with you, you spoke about finding spaces, no judgment zone spaces, and accountability. For people who want to connect with you, because this is what you do, how can they find you? How can they connect with you? How can they join your community?
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram at Tosin_Yemi Sunny. You can see some of my work on my website, tosinsonny.com. I have the most amazing community of just wonderful, wonderful sisters and friends called the Liberated Nation. But the way to get into the Liberated Nation is that we have a 12-week boot camp, healing boot camp. Because listen, that work, I don't just admit people into my community. No, you have to go through a 12-week healing journey with me, spiritual healing, soul healing, which will then birth personal transformation, so that when you are absorbed into the community, you already have a certain frame of mind. In the community, yes, we're still walking through stuff. We're still encouraging ourselves. We're still healing, but there is a basic level of understanding and equipment that you have, to walk your healing journey, so definitely you want to look out for Liberation Bootcamp and do that. There's information on it on my website as well. I have Tosin_Yemi Sunny, and then that's
Your
for
website.
Instagram. My website is tosinsonny.com. Yes, and then we can connect and
email.
Yes, you can write to me at tosin@tosinsonny.com.
Okay.
Tosin@tosinsonny.com. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This has been so amazing.
It's been my joy.
I wish I could say that we're going to do a giveaway of this book. But I don't know how many copies you have, and I don't want to promise. But
we'll see.
We'll see
if we can do it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tosin. This has been amazing. God
Thank
bless
you.
Thank you for sharing your story with us.
It's been my joy.